Hi, in this video we will talk about seizures in children. I'm gonna read from edition 22 of Nelson's volume 2, the nervous system chapter, and in that 633 chapter seizures in the childhood, page number 3588. Let's start. An epileptic seizure is a sudden transient occurrence of sign and or symptoms resulting from the abnormal excessive or synchronous neuronal activity in the brain. So this epileptic seizure is occurring how? From abnormal, excessive or synchronous neuronal activity in the brain. The International League Against the Epilepsy, that is ILAE, operational classification of the seizure type divide the epileptic seizure into four categories based on presumed mode of seizure onset. So it is divided into four categories by ILAE, that is focal, generalized, unknown onset, and unclassified. That we will read in detail in the next upcoming figures. In focal, formerly known as the partial seizures, this one is the first type that we are going to read. The first clinical and the electroencephalographic changes suggest the initial activation of the system of neurons limited to a part of one cerebral hemisphere. What is happening? The initial activation of system of neurons limited to a part of cerebral hemisphere. A particular set of neurons are initially activated. Focal seizures can be described as motor or non-motor and are further characterized by preserved or impaired consciousness. Fine. The focal one are further classified by the preserved or impaired consciousness, which is used synonymously with the term awareness. Simple partial seizures is outdated term that refers to focal seizures with no alteration in the consciousness or awareness. Fine. So what is simple partial seizure? It is basically focal seizure with no alteration in the consciousness or awareness. Okay. The current term is the focal aware seizures. This is the current term. Now there is something that is complex partial seizure is also an outdated term that denotes focal seizures with an altered consciousness or awareness of the surrounding. They are currently referred to as the focal seizures with the impaired awareness. Fine, so these are the new terms. Focal aware seizure and the focal seizure with the impaired awareness. In generalized seizures, so first we read about the focal seizure in which there was initial activation of system of neurons limited to a particular part of the cerebral hemisphere. Now, in the generalized seizure, this one is the second type that we are going to read. In generalized seizures, the first clinical and the EEG changes indicate synchronous involvement of both hemispheres. See, fine, there is synchronous involvement of both the hemispheres. A seizure may be labeled of being of unknown onset if there is not enough clinical information. Fine. Second one we read about was the generalized seizure. Third that we are going to read about is the of unknown onset. If there is not enough clinical information available to determine if the seizure is focal or generalized. Fine. If the clinical characteristics of a seizure are unusual and a determination of onset cannot be made, despite an adequate evaluation, the seizure may be labeled as unclassified. So these were all the types that we read. Fine. Approximately 30% of the patients who have a first afebrile seizure later develop epilepsy. The risk of approximately 20% if the neurologic exam, EEG, and the neuroimaging are normal. So, if a patient is having seizures without fever, then there are 30% chances of patient developing a later epilepsy. That is, there will be recurrent seizures. 30% chances. Okay. Moving ahead to febrile seizure. Febrile seizure are a separate category. There is in this chapter 33.1 it will be discussed. Acute symptomatic or provoked seizures occur secondary to an acute problem affecting the brain excitability, such as the electrolyte imbalance. Most children with these types of seizure do well. However, sometimes these seizures signify major structural, inflammatory, or the metabolic disorders of the brain, such as the meningitis, encephalitis, acute stroke, or brain tumor. Consequently, the prognosis depends on the underlying disorder, including its irreversibility or treatability and the likelihood of developing the epilepsy from it. An unprovoked seizure is one that is not an acute symptomatic seizure. A remote symptomatic seizure is one secondary to a distant brain injury, such as an old stroke. Now, coming to the reflex seizures, are type of seizure precipitated by a sensory stimulus. Fine. First, we read about this febrile seizure, then we are going to read about this reflex seizure. The reflex seizure are a type of seizure which are precipitated by sensory stimulus. Okay, these type of seizures can be caused by a variety of stimuli, like the visual, which is flickering lights and pattern or reading, and auditory, like music, and somatosensory or proprioceptive stimuli, praxis, eating, bathing in the hot water, or being startled. So these are reflex seizures. Epilepsy is a disorder of the brain characterized by enduring predisposition to generate seizure. Epilepsy is what? It is a disorder of brain. We all know that, right? Which is characterized by enduring this predisposition to generate seizure and by a neurobiologic, cognitive, psychologic, and social consequence of these conditions. The clinical diagnosis of epilepsy usually requires the occurrence of at least one unprovoked seizure with either a second such seizure or enough EEG and clinical information to convincingly establish the enduring predisposition to develop the recurrence. So, this is how the clinical diagnosis of epilepsy is made. Right? How? There should be the occurrence of at least one unprovoked epileptic seizure with either, if either of these can be present, a such seizure, or enough EEG and clinical information to convincingly establish this enduring predisposition to develop recurrences, that there are chances of recurrences. Fine. This is how we will establish a episode of we will establish epilepsy. For epidemiologic and commonly for clinical purposes, epilepsy is considered present when two or more unprovoked seizures occur in a time frame of longer than 24 hours in between them. This is for epidemiologic and commonly for clinical purposes. This is how we define epilepsy. Okay, there are two or more unprovoked seizures in a time frame longer than 24 hours in between. Okay, approximately 4 to 10% of the children experience at least one seizure, febrile or afebrile, in the first 16 years of their life. The cumulative lifetime incidence of epilepsy is only 3%, and more than half of the disorders start in the childhood. The annual prevalence is 0.5 to 1%. Thus, the occurrence of a single seizure or a febrile seizure does not necessarily imply the diagnosis of epilepsy, right? Seizure disorder is a general term that is usually used to include any of the several disorders, including epilepsy, febrile seizure, and possibly single seizures and symptomatic seizures secondary to metabolic infectious or secondary etiologies. So, seizure disorder is a very broad term that we can use for all of these that we just read, even for single seizures also and febrile seizures also. Moving ahead to an epileptiform syndrome. Epileptiform syndrome is a disorder that manifests as one or more specific seizure types and has a specific age of onset and a specific prognosis. Several types of the epileptic syndromes can be distinguished. We will read that in table. This category must be distinguished from the category of epileptic seizures that refers to single events rather than to a clinical syndrome. In general, the seizure type is the primary determinant of the medication to which the patient is likely to respond, and epilepsy syndrome determines the prognosis one could expect. Why we are categorizing this? Because why we are categorizing epileptic syndromes uh, differently, because in general the seizure type is a primary determinant of the medication to which the patient responds, and the epilepsy syndrome determines the prognosis one could expect. Okay, so if we diagnose a particular epilepsy syndrome, we can tell about the prognosis of that patient. An epileptic encephalopathy is an epilepsy syndrome in which there is a severe EEG abnormality that is thought to result in cognitive and other impairments. Developmental encephalopathy denotes a disorder in which the underlying etiology, a specific gene variant, contributes to developmental delay Independently of the patient's seizure burden or EEG abnormalities, the term epileptic and the developmental encephalopathy can be combined, that is, developmental epileptic encephalopathy, in specific situation where both the EEG abnormalities and the underlying etiology contribute to the patient's developmental delay. The ILAE task force on the classification has proposed a multi-level framework for categorizing the epilepsies. This framework should help guide the therapeutic decisions and assist for the prognostication. At the most basic level, level 1, a patient epilepsy can be classified by a seizure type, whether it's focal and generalized, or unknown. At the level 2, based on the available clinical data and the known seizure types, an epilepsy can be assigned focal and generalized, or unknown. At the next level, level 3, if further clinical data are available and based supporting studies, EEG or MRI, the diagnosis of a specific epilepsy syndrome can be made, either juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Concurrent to this classification paradigm, the associated comorbidities and the underlying cause for the epilepsy must also be considered. Categorized by etiologies, epilepsies are grouped into genetic, structural, metabolic, immune, infectious, or the unknown categories. It is important to note that these categories are not mutually exclusive, and the patient's epilepsy may have multiple concurrent etiologies, genetic and structural. At the final level, level 4 of categorizing and diagnosing the epilepsy syndromes, the underlying etiology, and the associated comorbidities are considered. Now, coming to the genetic epilepsy. Previously also referred to as the idiopathic epilepsy, implies that the epilepsy syndromes is the direct result of known or presumed genetic defects, that is, not a positive of a brain structure or metabolic disorder other than the epilepsy. This category encompasses genetic generalized epilepsy, previously called as idiopathic generalized epilepsies, such as the childhood absence epilepsy, as well as the epilepsies known by the gene defect. Structural epilepsy, previously called as the symptomatic epilepsy, refers to an epilepsy syndrome caused by an underlying structural brain disorder that may or may not be genetic. This includes etiologies such as the old stroke or hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Fine. These can be the etiologies for structural epilepsy, old stroke, or any HIE injury, as well as the epilepsy secondary to tuberous sclerosis, which is also genetic. Immune-mediated epilepsy is an important category that describes epilepsy occurring secondary to immune-mediated central nervous system inflammation. Okay. This group of disorder warrants special attention because immunotherapy such as the steroids or the intravenous immunoglobulins may be the first line treatments. An immune-mediated one, the first line treatments can be this immunotherapies and such as steroids or IVIGs. Autoimmune encephalitis such as the anti-N-methyl D-aspartate NMDA receptor encephalitis and the anti-LG1 limbic encephalitis are examples of immune-mediated epilepsies. These are the autoimmune encephalitis. Which one? This NMDA receptor encephalitis or the anti-LG1 limbic encephalitis. Infectious epilepsy describes epilepsy secondary to chronic infection such as the tuberculosis and HIV rather than an acute infection such as the bacterial meningitis or herpes simplex encephalitis. So infectious epilepsy is secondary to any chronic infection. Okay. We are reading this secondary to any chronic infection only. The older term cryptogenic epilepsy and the presumed symptomatic epilepsy refer to an epilepsy syndrome in which there is a presumed underlying brain disorder causing the epilepsy and affecting the neurologic function, but the underlying disorder is not known. The disorder is now referred to as the unknown epilepsy, in which the disorder is not known, the underlying disorder, designating that the underlying cause of epilepsy is still unknown. Now, how do we evaluate the first seizure episode? The initial evaluation of an infant or a child during or shortly after a suspected seizure should include an assessment of the adequacy of the airway, ventilation, and the cardiac function, as well as the measurement of temperature, blood pressure, and glucose concentration. So, this is the initial evaluation. Okay, we are supposed to do all that. assessment of adequacy of airway, ventilation, cardiac function, as well as measurement of what? Temperature, blood pressure, and glucose concentration. For acute evaluation of the first seizure, the physician should search for the potentially life-threatening causes of seizures. Okay. Firstly, we should search for these. It's safe to rule out these no life-threatening causes of seizures, such as the meningitis, systemic sepsis, unintentional or intentional head trauma, ingestion of drugs or medications, or other toxins. So first, we should rule out these life-threatening causes. The history should aim to determine if the event was a seizure or not, and to define factors that might have prompted the convulsion, and to provide a detailed description of the seizure and child's post-ictal state. So, what are our aims to ask in history? First, we have to determine if the event was a seizure or not. Fine. First, our goal is from the history is this, and to define factors that might have prompted the convulsion. So we have to search for the factors. Second thing, and to provide a detailed description of the seizure episode, like how was the seizure, what was happening during that time, was there only tonic contraction or there were tonic clonic movements, and the child, how was the child's state in the post-ictal, how long was the post-ictal phase, was there any incontinence afterwards. Fine, these are the things that we should ask in history. First was whether we have to ask whether it was a seizure or not. We have to ask in history in such a way to determine whether it was a seizure or not. Now, the factors which might have prompted the convulsion, and a detailed description of how was the seizure episode and the child in the post-ictal state. The subsequent step in an evaluation is to determine whether the seizure has focal onset or a generalized onset. Focal seizures could include forceful turning of the head and eyes to one side, unilateral clonic movements beginning to the face or extremities, or a sensory disturbance such as the paresthesia or the pain localized to a specific area. So this is all the history that we should ask for to rule out the focal seizures. What should be present in a child who is suspected of having focal seizure? There will be forceful turning of the head and the eyes to one side, unilateral clonic movements beginning in the face or the extremities. There will be unilateral clonic movements, or a sensory disturbance such as paresthesia or pain localized to a specific area. These three things: forceful turning of head and eyes to one side, unilateral clonic movements, and sensory disturbance such as paresthesia and pain localization to a specific area. Focal seizures in an adolescent or adult usually indicate a localized lesion. Fine, if there are focal seizures occurring, no, then if they indicate what? A localized lesion, whereas the seizures during the childhood are often either secondary to a lesion or the result of a genetic, commonly known as the idiopathic epilepsy. Focal seizure in a neonate may be seen because of focal lesions such as the perinatal stroke, or because of the metabolic abnormalities such as hypocalcemia. Focal seizure in neonate can be because of what? Any focal lesions such as the perinatal stroke, or because of metabolic abnormalities such as hypocalcemia that results in the focal seizure that may not be generalized because of immaturity of the brain. Fine. Why they are focal? Because of the immaturity of the brain. Okay. Focal and generalized motor seizures may be tonic, clonic, tonic, clonic, myoclonic, or atonic. Like, tonic is only the tone of the body has increased. Clonic is there are movements of that part. And in clonic we also write repetitive rhythmic jerking will be seen. There will be alternating contraction and relaxation of the muscle. Okay. And in myoclonic there will be sudden brief, like shock like jerk will be present, and it will be sudden and brief. Very brief muscle contractions will be seen in that myoclonic one. And in atonic there will be sudden loss of the muscle tone. Tonic seizures are characterized by increased tone or rigidity, usually lasting 2 seconds up to several minutes, and atonic seizures characterized by flaccidity. What was happening in tonic one? There was increase in the tone and rigidity, usually lasting up to 2 seconds up to several minutes. Fine. And an atonic one characterized by flaccidity and the lack of movement. In the clonic consists of rhythmic fast muscle contractions and slightly longer relaxations. Okay, there will be fast muscle contractions. And in myoclonus one, there will be shock-like contraction of the muscle for of less than 50 milliseconds that is often repeated. The duration of after off it's written after so many pages. There are very there's a lot of tables that we will read in the end of this video, so that those who don't want to go through all this can skip. The duration of will be continued from here. The duration of seizure and the state of consciousness retained or impact should be documented. Okay, what the duration of seizure and the state of consciousness should be documented. This is important, right? How was the state of consciousness? Because there is a syndrome, that is juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, in which the consciousness is retained, right? And also, focal seizures are divided into two types, like simple and complex, based on the consciousness only. The history should determine. So, if we are writing a history of a patient, no, after that we should write the interpretation of a seizure, and we should classify the seizure in either focal or generalized, or both focal and generalized. Then whether it's tonic, clonic, atonic, or myoclonic, or whatever it is, and about the consciousness of the patient, whether it was retained or impaired. The history should be determined whether an aura preceded the convulsion or not, right? Aura is also an important point of history. And the behavior of the child was exhibiting immediately preceding the seizure. What was the child doing just before the seizure occurrence? Okay. Auras can take the form of a number of sensations, including visual. There can be flashing of lights, right? In aura, there can be uh, visual sensation like the flashing of lights, or seeing colors, or complex visual hallucinations. Somatosensory, there can be some tinglings. There can be even olfactory, auditory, vestibular, or experiential. Experiential, like deja vu or deja vu. I don't know what's that. Feelings or sensations depending on the precise localization of the origin of the seizures. The most common aura experienced by the children consists of epigastric discomfort or the pain and a feeling of fear. This is the most common aura experienced by the children. There will be epigastric discomfort or pain and a feeling of fear. The posture of the patient, presence or absence of, and the distribution of the cyanosis, vocalization, loss of sphincter control, and the post-ictal phase should be noted. Okay, what should be noted? The posture of the patient, presence or absence, and the distribution of the cyanosis, vocalization, loss of sphincter control, more commonly of the bladder, and the post-ictal state, including the sleep, headache, and hemiparesis. Okay, the provider taking the history should ask specifically about each of these symptoms as appropriate because caretakers may not spontaneously report them. Determination of a focal versus generalized onset is sometimes difficult historically. That how was the seizure onset? A seizure may start focally and secondarily generalize too quickly to manifest observably early focal symptoms. Right, the seizure might have started focally, but it got generalized too quickly that the observer was not able to notice or differentiate. In addition, a caregiver witnessing the seizure later in its evolution may describe only the more generalized appearing signs. That's why we ask the patient to make a video of the episode, so that we can classify how was the origin of the seizure, right? In addition to clarify the seizure semiology, a detailed history is crucial to in identifying an underlying cause of the seizure. Reported personality changes or the symptoms of increased intracranial pressure can suggest intracranial tumor. If there are any personality changes or increased intracranial pressure, no, it can suggest what? Intracranial tumor. Similarly, a history of cognitive regression can suggest a degenerative or metabolic case, right? If there is cognitive regression, then there can be a degenerative or a metabolic disease. A history of perinatal Prenatal or perinatal distress or developmental delay can suggest etiologic, congenital, or the perinatal brain dysfunction. Acute or subacute personality changes, psychiatric symptoms, or associated involvement movement abnormalities may suggest autoimmune etiology. What is suggesting autoimmune etiology is acute to subacute personality changes. There will be personality changes. There will be psychiatric symptoms or associated movement abnormalities. They may suggest autoimmune etiology. Fine. The examination of a child with a seizure disorder should also be geared towards the search for an organic cause also. The child's head circumference, length, and the weight are plotted on a growth chart and compared with the previous measurement. A careful general and neurological examination should be performed. A fundoscopic exam should be performed to evaluate for the presence of papilledema, optic neuritis, retinal hemorrhages, uveitis, chorioretinitis, coloboma or macular changes, as well as retinal phacoma. The finding of unusual facial features or associated physical findings such as hepatosplenomegaly may point to the storage disease or inborn error of metabolism as the cause of the neurologic disorder. Fine, if there are what? Uh, Unusual facies. One second. If there are unusual facies along with any physical findings such as hepatomegaly, it may point towards storage disease or the inborn error of metabolism as the cause. The presence of neurocutaneous disorders may be indicated by presence of vitellinous ash leaf-type lesions, usually better seen using a UV light wood lamp. Fine, if there are presence of what? Now we are talking about the neurocutaneous syndromes, okay, and this is important. Presence of vitellinous ash leaf-type lesions, better seen using what? UV light in the wood lamp, or adenoma sebaceum, shagreen patches, or the retinal phacomas, which are seen in this tuberous sclerosis of multiple, or there can be multiple cafe spots, which are seen in neurofibromatosis, or V1 or V2 distribution of the nevus flemmis, fine, which is seen in Sturge-Weber syndrome, which will be discussed in the further chapters. All the neurocutaneous syndromes. Localizing the neurologic signs such as subtle hemiparesis with the hyperreflexia or equivocal or positive Babinski sign and a pronated drifting of an extended arm with the eyes closed might suggest the contralateral hemispheric structural lesions such as a slow growing glioma. As the cause of seizure disorder. So when we have to suspect glioma, which is a slow-growing brain tumor, as a cause, when there are some localizing neurologic signs, such as hemiparesis, right? There are some localizing neurologic signs that the glioma, the growing tumor, is pressing something. With there is hemiparesis with hyperreflexia, which indicates a central cause, right? And there is a positive Babinski sign, and there is a pronated drifting of the extended arm and eyes with eyes closed. It might suggest a contralateral hemistructural lesion also. Fine. Unilateral growth arrest of the thumbnail, hand, or extremity in a child with a focal seizure disorder suggests a chronic condition such as porencephalic cyst. Okay, so when we have to suspect these chronic conditions such as a porencephalic cyst, arteriovenous malformation, or cortical atrophy of the opposite hemisphere, when there is unilateral growth arrest of the thumbnail, hand, or extremity of a child with a focal seizure, then we have to suspect something chronic. We read what chronic? Something like porencephalic cyst, any AV malformations, any cortical atrophy, or the opposite hemisphere. In an acute setting such as the emergency department, the decision to pursue further laboratory testing, including the serum electrolytes, uh, complete blood count, or urine toxicology test, should be made case by case basis that considers the patient clinical history and examination. ECG to rule out the long QT or the other cardiac dysrhythmias and other tests directed at the disorders that could mimic the seizures may be needed. A lumbar puncture is usually of limited value in an acute workup of a non-febrile seizure, unless the history or examination is concerning for the infectious or inflammatory process, or if there is clinical concern for the intracranial bleeding despite normal brain imaging. Fine. Then in these cases, lumbar puncture was used. A routine EEG should be performed in all the cases of the first unprovoked non-febrile seizure to help predict the risk of seizure recurrence. This is a very important line. Usually, consultants don't allow us to have a EEG in the first episode of seizure, right? But you should. So, a routine EEG should be performed in all cases of the first unprovoked non-febrile seizure to help predict the risk of seizure recurrence. If a patient's neurologic status has returned to the baseline, the EEG can often be done on an outpatient basis, even though the yield may be slightly lower because the EEG has been delayed beyond the first 12 hours. Emergent brain imaging with the head CT or the brain MRI is usually performed if the seizure was focal. Fine, this CT or MRI is performed if the seizure was focal. If there are post-ictal focal deficits on the neurologic examination, or if the patient's status is not returning to baseline. If there are what post-ictal focal deficits and the patient's status is not returning to baseline, then in these cases we can perform head CT or a brain MRI. And in patients with the high-risk medical history also. In other situations, the yield of emergent imaging identifying an abnormality that warrants emergent intervention is less than 1%. Brain MRI is preferred over a CT scan, and performing it on a uh, non-merchant basis should be considered in most patients. CT is useful if a rapid study is needed to look for the trauma, a mass, or signs of the increased intracranial pressure. In select situations, such as when the clinical and the EEG manifestation are consistent with a genetic generalized epilepsy, such as the childhood absence epilepsy or a brain MRI, may not be necessary. Gadolinium contrast does not need to be routinely used when performing the brain MRI unless there is a clinical suspicion of the neoplasm, vascular malformation, abscess, or another infectious or inflammatory process. So, gadolinium MRI is not routinely done. It is done only when we are suspecting something. It can be either a neoplasm or vascular malformation or abscess. When we are suspecting these things, then only we have to do gadolinium MRI. Further details regarding the approach to first seizure are included in the chapter 633.2, the 2021 guidelines from the American College of Radiology provide recommendation in the different clinical scenarios for the pediatric patient presenting with the seizures while taking into consideration the patient age, precipitating events, clinical findings, EEG, and the neurodevelopmental status. These addresses neonatal seizures, simple and complex febrile seizures, post-traumatic seizures, focal seizures, and the primary generalized seizures.